She's lost her mind. She thinks she's a resurrected being and a god. You know, those chilling words are actually from a frantic 911 call made way back in January 2019. The man on the other end of the line was absolutely terrified, and not just for his own safety, but for his family's. He was practically begging authorities to see the disaster that was coming, but, well, his warnings slipped right through the cracks. And what happened next was a horrific, multi-state tragedy that completely defies logic.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unraveling the Doomsday Cult Mystery. We're going to rely purely on documented facts, police interviews, and concrete timelines to decode exactly what went down in the infamous Lori Vallow Daybell case. We'll trace the steps of this entire investigation to untangle a really dark web of extremism and delusion. Let's get right into it.
So the big question we're tackling today is honestly staggering. How in the world does a woman, someone whose own friends literally described her as a beloved mother of the year, transform so radically that she becomes the center of a deadly doomsday cult? To wrap our heads around this, we have to go back to the very first red flags. Understanding this psychological leap is absolutely crucial because it shows us just how easily everyday people can fall down a rabbit hole of dangerous ideologies before anyone even realizes what's happening.
Part 1. A husband's chilling warning. We're jumping back to January 31st, 2019. Lori's husband, Charles Vallow, had just gotten back from a business trip, having no idea his entire world was about to be flipped upside down. Imagine this. Charles gets home and he is immediately hit with a barrage of red flags. He's locked out of his own house. His car is completely gone. A massive chunk of cash has just been drained from his bank account. And the absolute worst part? Lori explicitly threatens to murder him. I mean, this wasn't just your standard marital argument, right? It was such a severe, abrupt escalation that Charles called 911 right then and there, totally desperate to check on his 16-year-old daughter, Tylee, and his 6-year-old son, JJ.
While on the phone with the police, Charles dropped a bombshell. He told them, Lori actually said to him, "You're not Charles. I can murder you now with my powers." Yeah. According to Charles, Lori genuinely believed his body had been taken over by an evil spirit named Nick Schneider. She had become completely obsessed with these extreme fringe religious teachings, and she thought she was part of this elite group called the 144,000, basically high priests preparing for the literal end of the world. Charles knew right then that her threats were incredibly real.
So the very next morning, Charles took action. He got an emergency mental health petition to force Lori into a psychiatric evaluation. Which brings us to a really heartbreaking number here, 2. Lori goes into the facility, but she is released after just 2 hours. 2 hours. The doctors somehow found no issues. So that tiny, incredibly brief window of time basically slammed the door shut on Charles's one real attempt to get professional intervention. The authorities let her walk, and Charles realized he had absolutely no choice but to file for divorce.
That total lack of intervention really set the stage for what happens next. Let's move the timeline forward 6 months to Part 2, the fatal confrontation in July 2019.
Charles was found dead on the living room floor of Lori's home. He'd been shot twice by Lori's brother, Alex Cox. Now, Lori, Alex, and Tylee all gave the exact same story. They claimed a fight broke out over a baseball bat, and Alex had to shoot Charles in self-defense. But when you look at the autopsy reality, it tells a completely different story. The autopsy showed Charles was shot while he was lying flat on the ground. I mean, come on, you simply do not shoot an incapacitated person a second time while they're already down in a normal self-defense scenario.
And it gets even more suspicious when you look at this number, 45. It took almost 45 minutes after the gunshots for anyone in that house to actually pick up the phone and dial 911. During the interrogations, Alex and Lori played the "we were in shock" card, with Lori even claiming she left the scene to drop JJ off at school before coming back. But investigators quickly realized that 45 minutes is a highly convenient window of time. It's exactly enough time to say, concoct a fake self-defense story and get everyone on the same page before the cops show up. And yet, despite all these glaring red flags, the police actually initially ruled it as self-defense.
With Charles gone, the biggest barrier protecting those kids was suddenly removed. That brings us to Part 3, Inside the Doomsday Cult. At this point, Lori had fallen incredibly deep into the dark teachings of a doomsday author named Chad Daybell.
Investigators spoke with Lori's friends and uncovered this absolutely wild, dangerous theology. In their circle, the word zombie wasn't a joke.
It was literally defined as an unclean spirit that gets trapped on Earth, pushes a person's original spirit out of their body, and completely takes over. This wasn't some metaphor to them, they believed it was literally happening. Lori believed Charles had been pushed out by a dark spirit, and this horrifying concept is exactly what allowed her to emotionally detach. In her mind, if you are a zombie, your original spirit was already dead and gone. They actually created this bizarre mathematical spreadsheet to rank human beings. It was all based on a vibration level. If your vibration hit 1,000, you started translation, which meant spiritual elevation. If you hit 2,500, you unlocked portaling, which they believed was literal supernatural travel. Chad would even use a pendulum to grade people on a trust scale from 0 to 100%. The darker your spirit graded, the bigger threat you were. And terribly, Lori started telling her friends that her own little boy JJ was changing, claiming he was becoming a zombie, and that zombies needed to be eradicated to purify the earth.
This totally radical, dehumanizing belief system leads right into the most heartbreaking part of this explainer. Part 4, the missing children.
Just look at the sheer velocity of this timeline. It's terrifying. July 2019, Charles is killed. Literally weeks later, in August, Lori uproots the entire family and moves them all the way to Rexburg, Idaho. And guess whose hometown that happens to be? Chad Daybell's. Then September hits, and everything goes totally dark. After a family trip to Yellowstone, Tylee is never seen alive again. A few days later, on September 17th, JJ is caught on a neighbor's doorbell camera running into his house. And after that day, both kids just completely vanish into thin air.
Nobody even checks on them until November, when Charles's parents finally raise the alarm and police do a welfare check. And here we see Lori's calculated evasion in action. She stands there and calmly tells the cops, "Oh, JJ is back in Arizona staying with my friend Melanie." But when detectives actually track down Melanie, not only does she deny having JJ, but she confesses that Lori explicitly called and asked her to lie to the cops. So Lori wasn't confused or having a mental break here, she was actively, deliberately covering her tracks.
But eventually, that massive web of lies had to break. Which brings us to Part 5, a tragic final discovery. By this point, the sheer number of weird coincidences surrounding Lori, including the sudden death of her brother Alex in December, had just reached impossible levels. Law enforcement finally backed her into a corner through a series of legal escalations. Step 1. In January 2020, they hit her with a strict legal order demanding she physically produce the kids to prove they're okay. Step 2. She completely blows past that deadline and they arrest her over in Hawaii, slapping her with a massive $5 million bail. But even sitting in a jail cell, she and Chad refused to say a word. It took another agonizing 5 months before we get to Step 3. Police finally execute a massive search warrant on Chad Daybell's property in Idaho. And what they found buried in that yard ended the search, and sadly confirmed everyone's absolute worst fears. The reality of this discovery is incredibly grim. They unearthed the remains of both JJ and Tylee. Little JJ was found bound, wrapped in duct tape, and placed inside a plastic bag. And Tylee's remains had been horrifically dismembered and burned in a fire pit on the property. That completely delusional theology, the one that treated living, breathing human beings as disposable zombies, had reached its ultimate devastating conclusion.
All of this leaves us with one haunting question. If law enforcement had taken a husband's desperate 911 warning seriously on day 1, if that tiny 2-hour psychiatric hold had been treated with just a little more scrutiny, could this entire tragedy have been prevented? Could those lives have been saved? It's a heavy, uncomfortable question for sure, but it forces us to really look at the catastrophic cost of ignored warnings, the blind spots in our systems, and the terrifying, real-world power of unchecked extremist beliefs. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions and never stop looking at the facts.